The first thing I would say is that the capitalist system is in an absolute crisis. It's the biggest crisis, even they admit, since the 1930s, but I would go further than that. This is the most serious crisis in 200 years of capitalism. And they have no idea whatsoever how to solve this crisis. No idea at all. I mean, if you take Europe, they have summit meetings, I don't know how many they've had over the last 4 or 5 years, I've lost count. And each one is a decisive summit that's going to decisive. I think they've stopped having them now because the crisis is not solved. In Greece, certainly it's not solved. It's a very, very serious situation in Greece. And Italy, Spain, Portugal, and so on are not far behind. France is not far behind. And America, look at the mess they've got in the States with a colossal deficit and so on. So everywhere you look, there's a crisis, and therefore, they have no. The first point is that the bourgeois have no answer to this, none whatever. I mean, there was actually a meeting in London, I don't know if you know about this, in 2009, shortly after the collapse of Barings Bank, called by The Economist, The Economist magazine, which is a right-wing British magazine, to which they invited the most famous economists in the world, And in the course of that, and by the way, the only question on the table is what the hell is happening? This is not supposed to happen, because they denied that this crisis would happen, They said that Marx was wrong because he predicted the crisis of capitalism. Well, Marx was not wrong. And in the course of this meeting, one of these guys, Paul Krugman, that you probably heard of, won the Nobel Prize for Economics, said the following. For the last 30 years, he said, macroeconomic theory has been, in the best instance, spectacularly useless, and in the worst case scenario, positively harmful. This is Paul Krugman. So, first point is that the bourgeois don't know what to do. They're in a complete ideological, political, and moral crisis. And some of these guys, curiously, even have said that Marx was right. Like Nouriel Roubini in New York, Marx is right. Now, so therefore, ideologically, if you're referring to the ideas of Marxism, history has shown that Marx was completely correct in everything he said about capitalism. Now, the question you ask is a little bit different to that. How do these ideas take on a material form? Now, that comes to the heart of the problem, because even if you take the events of the last few months, the last 12 months, you've had an uprising in Turkey, you had an uprising in Brazil, none of which was expected, you see. Both Turkey and Brazil were supposed to be growing, they're supposed to be even models and so on. Egypt even, 17 million people came on the streets in June of last year. In Greece, how many general strikes have you had? I've lost count. I don't know, 30, I can't remember. So there's a movement there, and in general I find people are very open now to the ideas of Marxism. Even in the United States, I was there recently. There's an interest in these ideas which was not there before. What's the problem? Well, the problem can be summed up very simply in one word: the lack of leadership. You see, none of the parties, they talk about the left in Europe. Well, I'm sorry to say, I regret to say this, but somebody says the European, what left? None of these parties are adequately expressing the real mood that exists in society. I'm sorry to say that even Syriza in Greece is not adequately expressing this mood. I saw a very interesting opinion poll in Greece about 18 months ago, less, in which they said about, 23% of people were in favor of a fundamental change, and about 63% were in favor, or rather of revolution, I beg your pardon. 23% were in favor of revolution, 63% were in favor of a fundamental change, which is the same. So the problem is, and the problem that we have to deal with, is it's necessary to organize the mood that exists. There is a mood of rebellion. I mean, I remember, I've been coming to Greece for many years, and I hadn't been to Greece since last year for about 10 years. And the first thing I said was, look, this is a different country. This is a different country. And it's a different people with a different mentality now. I mean, for example, I think if I were to say 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, come to Greece, come to Athens and talk about revolutions, I think most people would say, who's this strange man with these strange ideas? What do you mean? It's prosperity, everybody's rich, everybody's doing well. Now, what's the business? I'll bet you, if I were to speak to any taxi driver in Athens or any shopkeeper and say, well, what is required here is a revolution, most of them would agree with me. That's just what's required. So it is possible, but the question is that we have not yet been able to organize this mood that does exist. That is the task which we must tackle together. We must discuss how is this to be done. Because it can be done, it must be done, and of course it will be done. Well, first of all, it is clear that the rise of Syriza, which by the way is quite spectacular, no matter what you think about Syriza, it's quite a significant development, and there's no doubt that it reflects a left shift in the mood of the masses in Greece. There's no question about that. Tsipras himself originally made some very left-sounding speeches and so on about rejecting the moratorium as well, which is correct and which is necessary. But you see, the problem is, the problem I see with the leadership of Syriza, as with many other left parties, is that they don't have a clear Marxist ideology or position. And therefore, it's a very, to put it mildly, it's a very confused message that's coming forward. And unfortunately, I've noticed lately that Comrade Tsipras and the others, as they come closer to power, they're less and less radical in what they say. I get the impression that they're trying to convince the bankers and the capitalists and the Troika that we're really okay, you know, that we can be safe to be in power. Now this is no good at all. Not even from a practical point of view, it's no good, because the Greek people are obviously reached the limit of their patience. It's the limit of their endurance. They require a fundamental change. That's shown even in the opinion polls. And therefore the left leaders should express that clearly and come out clearly that the only solution, let's spell it out, the only solution is a complete break with capitalism, a complete break with the Troika. I mean, if Tsipras wins the election, which I hope, we will support that, it's necessary, but if I were Tsipras, I'd immediately come on the television and I would tell the truth to the people of Greece. That's all, just tell the truth. Look at the situation that we're in. This is hopeless. We've been reduced to this mess by the actions of the bankers, the capitalists, the corrupt gangsters that rule Greece. First of all, I've said that we're going to break with the moratorium. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Reject the moratorium completely. But that's not enough, because then there'd be a flight of capital and all the rest. We know that everything that the right wing say, well, they're correct. Therefore, at the same time, and you should explain this on the television, we're going to nationalize, we're going to expropriate without compensation the land, the banks and big business in Greece, the ship owners and all the rest of these parasites, people who don't pay their taxes. Everyone in Greece knows this. The small people pay taxes, the big people do not. Now, I think that 90% of the Greek people, if they heard this message, I think they'd be dancing in the streets. There'd be colossal support for this. The reaction would be paralyzed, there's no question about this. But the point you made about Europe is significant, because is it possible to succeed in this just in Greece alone? The answer is obviously not. But I would put it to you that this mood of anger, of indignation, of fury, doesn't only exist in Greece, it's general throughout Europe. There's unemployment, there's poverty, there's above all terrible inequality. In my own country, in Britain, there's a rage against the bankers earning colossal public money, you know. By the way, they talk about bailing out Greece and helping Greece with European money. This is a lie. The people that are being bailed out is not the Greek people, it's the German bankers. And the French bankers? And the English bankers? In my country, I believe that bankers are slightly less popular than paedophiles and serial murderers, you know. Slightly less. They're extremely unpopular. If there was a political party in favour of the death penalty for bankers, I think they would sweep the elections. I'm talking about Britain, not Greece. Look at Spain. Look at Portugal, where there's been huge mass movements and so on. Italy, I think, they can't even form a government because why? Because the people are dissatisfied with all the existing parties. I think that's even true of Greece. I saw in an opinion poll that the most popular political party was nobody. I think they got 40%. Why? Only because, unfortunately, the left leaders are not sufficiently left. The problem is not that they're too left. The problem is that they're not consistently left-wing socialists. I would say Marxists. And that's what people are demanding now. So what I would say is if the leaders of Syriza would come to power and really act in a consistent manner and then make an appeal for support to the workers of Spain, Italy, France, Britain, even Germany, I'll tell you that you get support. You'd have similar movements taking place in those. People would say, well, if they can do it in Greece, why can't we do it here? It's about time that we expropriated the banks. Is this extremism? You know, I'm often accused of being an extremist. I'm not an extremist. I consider myself a very moderate person. You know, I don't want to nationalise everything, by the way. I'm not in favour of that. No. I've got a very modest proposal. As I've said, we only want to expropriate three things: the land, the banks, and the big monopolies. That's enough. You know, quite so, under democratic workers' control. Now that's a program, I believe now, that would make sense, not to the advanced political left-wing theoreticians, but to the mass of people who are fed up with this system, suffering terribly as a result of this system, and are demanding radical action. And that's what's required. The problem is these people consider themselves to be realists. That makes me laugh. It's not realism at all. I mean, PASOK in Greece, which years ago did have, on paper it had a left program, years ago when I first came to Greece and so on. Why is it unpopular? Why is it lost support? Precisely because it tries to defend the capitalist system. Tries to defend, as you say, to be all things to all men, as you say. That's not possible. What's required now is a consistent policy in the interest of the big majority of the Greek people, who were the workers, the peasants, the middle class also, of course, who are being ruined, the small shopkeepers and so on. We must get their support. They're being ruined by big business, by the banks and capitalists and so on. And therefore, the only realistic policy is a policy, I would say, to stand clearly for revolution, fundamental transformation of society. If you don't like that word, we're not arguing about words. And I'm certain that, above all in Greece, that policy is very realistic and would be very popular with the mass of people, even the middle class, who've been ruined by the system. Well, the European Union has always been a union in the interests of the bankers and capitalists of Europe. It's not in the interest of working people. I mean, as far as I'm an internationalist, I would like to see the unification of Europe. Europe shouldn't be divided. The Balkans shouldn't be divided. Look at all the terrible problems you've had in the Balkans because of these reactionary national frontiers. Therefore, yes, we stand for the unity of Europe. Yes, but it cannot be done on the basis of capitalism. That's what the experiences show. Have they overcome the national divisions and contradictions in Europe? They have not. The euro made things worse, as a matter of fact. I mean, it'd be good to have, if you had a socialist Europe, then you would have a common currency. It'd be done on the basis of a democratic, voluntary union, as people would, on the basis of equality. There's no equality here. It's dominated by a handful of banks and by one country, which is Germany, which decides everything. Merkel decides everything now. You know, it's a paradox. You know, this is the 100th anniversary of the First World War. Germany tried on 2 occasions, German imperialism, to conquer Europe. Now they've achieved what they wanted all along by economic means, not by military means. They dominate everything through the banks and so on. Yes, but it's led to a catastrophe. Even the introduction of the euro has sharpened the national contradictions. In the past, a country like Greece or Italy, for example, or Spain, if they were in economic difficulties, they could devalue the currency and therefore somehow get some kind of an advantage. Now that's not possible. So now you can't have a devaluation, and the only thing you can have is what they call an internal devaluation. That means to say an attack on living standards, not only in Greece but everywhere, every single country. And what that shows is that on a world scale, not just in Europe, on a world scale, capitalism now is in such a deep crisis that the bourgeoisie wants to destroy all the gains that the working class have made over the last 50 years. Push us back to the Stone Age. In Britain, for example, which is supposed to be the classical country of reformism, and they did carry out big reforms, huge reforms, after the Second World War. When there was an economic upswing, they could afford them, and under the pressure of the working class, because the bourgeoisie the ruling class never gave us anything. It all had to be conquered, but through struggle, you know. But now these gains must be destroyed, and they are destroying them, bit by bit, everywhere. In Greece it's an extreme case, but everywhere they have the same program of destroying the welfare state and free education and free health. And pensions. I see now they want to introduce pensions for everyone above the age of 85. We'll all be dead by that time. See, so that's the idea. So, but the only question is this: that the working class is not going to accept this with their arms folded anyway. It's a recipe for class struggle, and that's going to take place throughout Europe and throughout the world. I mean, everywhere you find the movements taking place, in Turkey, in Brazil, and so on. Instability everywhere. Now, Thailand, in Bangladesh, in Kampuchea, everywhere. It's as a result of, not so much as a result of the European Union or the euro, it's a result of the crisis of capitalism itself.
And what is the valve of safety, let's say, of capitalism to save himself?
They haven't got one. Well, that's an interesting question. First of all, I agree with you. I mean, Lenin pointed out that there's no such thing as a final crisis of capitalism. That is to say that the capitalist system will always recover even from the deepest crisis, okay? Unless it's overthrown by the working class. They'll always find some way out. That's true, but you know, it's a bit abstract. It's a general statement. It doesn't tell me anything about this specific situation. For example, if you ask me, does the capitalist system possess methods whereby they can avoid a crisis, economic crisis of overproduction? I answer yes. The mechanisms are well known. For example, an expansion of credit. And there's been a huge expansion of credit.
This was the last weapon. The credit was the last weapon.
That's but right.
Now this weapon is exhausted.
It's finished.
It's finished.
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
That's why. How can look? Just one figure I will give. In 1964, the total credit in the United States of America, all credits included, was $1 trillion. $1 million. That's a lot of money, isn't it? By 1967, by 2007, I beg your pardon. You know how much it was? $50 trillion. This means that capitalism went beyond its limits, you know, expanding demand artificially. But now it has to be pulled back. Marx explains this even in the Communist Manifesto, never mind about capital, where he says the capitalists can only get around the crisis only by causing a deeper crisis in the future. So they avoided a crisis for 20 years, and now as a result of that, they're in a deep mess with huge debts, which must be paid, and who's going to pay them? That's the question. Capitalists won't pay them. The bill must be passed to the poor people, as you see in Greece. The other possibility, one other thing would be to maintain low interest, lower the rate of interest, you know. But the rate of interest now is close to zero. So how can they lower that? That's not possible. You know. The other possibility would be the state doing it, what the Keynesians say. The state should, how can the state spend money when they got colossal debts? So all those avenues are blocked. There's one other possibility which sometimes people mention, that's what about war? Maybe they could go to war like they did in 1914, 1939, that's true.
This will be my next question.
Yes.
With you now.
Yes, carry on.
In one of the last articles, your articles, you mentioned, you did a parallel between 1914 and 2014.
Yes.
So, do you think that now the situation, the conditions, can lead us to some unpleasant situations in Europe, such
like war?
Like war.
Yeah, but the question is, it's a concrete question.
Yeah.
The answer is no, because the concrete conditions are entirely different now. War between whom? And first of all, Germany in both world wars, they were fighting to conquer markets and so on. They seized Belgium and all the rest of it. They don't need to do that now. Germany already controls Europe. They don't need to go to war. So you think Greece is going to declare war on Germany? I don't think so. You think France is going to declare war on Germany? Also not. It's ruled out by the correlation of forces is different. In any case, now, these little states in Europe are quite irrelevant. They're pygmies, you know. It's the big states that matter, like the United States or China, even Russia. That's why they had to try to join together in the common market, as it was originally, you know, to acquire a base to play some kind of an independent role in the world. Can the European Union fight against America? Well, obviously not. It's ridiculous. They don't even have an army. Or fight against Russia. It's a joke. Can the Americans invade China as they would have done in the past? They cannot. China is a powerful country with a big army. So that's a world war in that sense. Is a war between the big powers is ruled out because of concrete reasons. But there'll be small wars all the time, such as in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and so on. That's terrible, of course, and that will occur all the time. That shows the contradictions of capitalism. Well, what that reflects, as a general rule, is the enormous discontent and frustration that many people feel with the existing parties, and who can blame them? In Britain, for example, the Labour Party now should win the elections easily, but with this right-wing, hopeless right-wing leadership that we've got, people say, well, what's the difference? And everywhere it's the same story. All the Social Democrats say is, well, we agree on cuts, we agree on austerity, but we'll do it a bit better, a bit nicer. That's no good. People shrug their shoulders. And that's why PASOK is collapsing in Greece and so on, you know. And therefore, what I'll predict is this. First of all, in Greece, it isn't true to say that there's a swing to the right, because Syriza is still on top. That's a swing to the left, actually. But the Golden Dawn, that's a warning. Now, you see, what's interesting is this. Some people ask the question, well, is there not a possibility of fascism in Europe? They think of the 1930s and so on. Yes, but this is a different Europe now. Fascism in the 1930s and 20s had a mass base. What was the mass social base? Well, it was the peasantry, it was the middle class, it was the white-collar workers, the teachers, the bank workers, people who didn't consider themselves part of the working class. Look at the position now. Because of the development of capitalism, it wasn't long ago since the peasantry was a majority in Greece. And you know, the church and the fascists and so on, they get support in the countryside. What percentage of Greeks now are peasants?
7%.
Very small.
Very small.
In Italy, they were the majority. They've been liquidated. In Spain, they've been liquidated. In France, they've been liquidated.
20 years ago, there were about 20%.
That's right. And you think of, for example, teachers bank workers, civil servants in the past, and students would have been material for fascism in all these countries. Okay? What's the position now? You look at in any country now, strikes and demonstrations, the most militant sections are the teachers, the civil servants, the white-collar workers, and the students, where it's a big left-wing movement. So the whole basis of fascism now is being sharply reduced. But there's another reason, you see. The working class is very strong, actually. It's strong in Greece, it's strong in Spain, it's strong in Italy, it's strong in Britain. So the ruling class, if they want to push things back, and they do want to, they face a big problem. The truth of the matter is this. At this moment in time, in no country, the ruling class wants to base itself on the fascists and the extreme. And on the contrary, they're basing themselves on the labour leaders. That's the truth of the matter. It's the labour leaders, both the trade union and the political leaders, that are saving capitalism, not the fascists. They don't need and even in Greece at this moment in time, they don't need the ruling class doesn't need the golden dawn in power yet. That's why they took some action against them recently, because they were going too far. I think they were crazy enough to think they could take power, the golden dawn. They must be a bit mad. The ruling class doesn't want that. Why? Because it will provoke the working class. The Greek workers have got revolutionary traditions, are very militant, and they got long memories. And they still remember the junta. And therefore there's no question, if they try to move down that road now, at the very least it would provoke civil war. And the problem is the ruling class in Greece wouldn't be confident of winning a civil war because of the strength of the workers. Therefore they've got to keep these mad dogs on a leash temporarily. However, the problem is this. I believe that Syriza will win the next election. There'll be some kind of a left coalition. If they were to carry out a socialist policy, as I've said earlier, there'd be no problem. There'd be an enormous enthusiasm. The right wing would be eradicated, would be swept aside. But if they pursue a policy of conciliation with the banks and with the Troika, there'll be a tremendous mood of anger and demoralization and disappointment, and that can prepare the road for a right-wing government in the future. Not immediately a fascist government, but there could be a government with a new democracy in coalition with the Golden Dawn. That's possible. No, it's possible. I hope not also. But the problem is this, you see. Reformism, the role of reformism in the social democracy, it prepares the way for reaction. They disappoint people, People will be very disappointed. They place their hopes on a left-wing government, and they say, well, even these people also have betrayed us. Then you can have a swing to the right in Greece. Like in France, I think that will take place. Clearly, Hollande in France, he was supposed to be a left-winger. There was a big swing to the left in the last. You couldn't say there was a swing to the right in France. It's a huge swing. The Socialist Party had a huge majority. What have they done? They carried out a few reforms. The bourgeoisie then put pressure on them, and now they're going the other way. So the support for Hollande is collapsing, and Le Pen is picking up support. Yes, of course. Mind you, Le Pen. Her father was extreme right-wing, but she's tried to develop a more moderate image. That's usually the case with these people. So it's not a fascist thing, but it would be a vicious right-wing government. But that again, you see, in France will provoke a wave of strikes and demonstrations. You could even have another 68. It's quite possible. Of course, that's why the only hope would be to appeal to the workers of the rest of the Euro to follow our example, and they will get support. They get tremendous support if Syriza were to really act in a consistent socialist and international manner. Like the Bolsheviks in 1917, they'd have even bigger support. There'd be a wave of demonstrations, protests, and so on. But if they compromise, then that's a disaster. And by the way, if Greece were to leave the common market, as some left people in Greece are advocating, I think that's a big mistake. To leave, to propose the drachma as the alternative, that's no alternative. on a capitalist basis. I mean, if they were to leave on a capitalist basis, all that would happen is that the drachma would collapse immediately. And who would want drachmas? Everyone knows that Greece would leave the common market and have the drachma only from the point of view of devaluing the drachma. So nobody will want drachmas, it would collapse. And the Greek economy would collapse with terrible consequences. So I would say this, either in or out of the common market, or Europe that is to say, of the euro, on a capitalist basis there's no future for Greece, inside or out.